The Battle Frontier, a post-game gauntlet in Emerald intended to provide an experience similar to competitive battling. It's not enough to simply walk in with your casual playthrough team, especially if you don't understand battle mechanics well, as the trainers here can and will destroy you. Unlike the main story, overleveling doesn't help since levels are adjusted to match, and the opposing teams have capable and often competitively viable Pokemon. But I'm not a fan of building around metagames, and today I felt like bringing some real underdogs in. Can you beat the Battle Frontier with only Little Cup Pokemon? The Frontier consists of 7 facilities, all with varying gimmicks and rules, so I'll be tackling each one in their own video. For today's facility, I'm picking Battle Dome, which has us facing off against opponents in a 2v2 elimination style tourney. Before we dive into Dome specifics, let's quickly go over the rules. First, I'm only allowed to use the first stage of an evolution line, and if a Pokemon doesn't evolve, it's off limits. Since the Pokédex has changed quite a bit over the years, we'll be using the Gen 3 Pokédex to define evolution lines, meaning Pokemon that got evolutions in a later generation are off limits. Additionally, not all first stage Pokemon are created equal, and in Generation 3, I consider Scyther and Chansey to be outliers who have such high stats that they defeat the spirit of this challenge, so those two are not allowed. Finally, we're aiming for the gold symbol in each facility, so when we get it, it's challenge complete. The Battle Dome is a pretty interesting facility since we can see the opponent's Pokemon before we go in, and choose 2 of our team to counter what we see. However, in order to get the symbols, we have to win 20 and 40 battles in a row without a loss, and the final fight for each symbol is the Dome Ace Tucker, who carries 2 quite threatening teams. On the way to Tucker, we do these battles in sets of 4, with each set getting progressively more difficult, and by the end, even legendaries can be on opposing teams. So if you were putting together a team of Pokemon for this gauntlet, which 3 would you choose? Drop your team in a comment below. Honestly, I wasn't too sure up front, so I simply picked a set that I thought could take on Tucker's Silver Symbol team, namely Abra, Diglett, and Lileep. My plan was to use Abra and Diglett as fast sweepers that could clean out easy enemies, then stall out anything they couldn't handle with Lileep through Toxic. Despite choice specs not existing in Gen 3, Abra was able to handle quite a number of threats due to its move pool and high special attack. On the flip side, choice band does exist though, so Diglett mostly ran moves that had high base power and did pretty well picking up KOs. Lileep was a more interesting story. Without access to Recover or Leech Seed, it doesn't really stand out as a stall Pokemon, but with the right spread of EVs, it can generally live 2 hits from an opposing Pokemon. Protect and Leftovers supported by Ingrained and Giga Drain can generally extend that window just long enough. Even better is that it matched up well versus a lot of things that my sweepers couldn't one-shot, such as Feraligatr, Slacking, Salamence, and so on. I actually felt that this team performed pretty well early on in Dome, and my losses were mostly due to bad leads or predictions, and not the team itself. Surprisingly, after only 10 attempts I reached the Silver Symbol fight and faced up against Tucker. After 9 minutes of simulating battle possibilities, I settled on leading Lileep, since on paper it could stall out anything on his team. He led with Swampert, which is a particularly good matchup due to its 4x weakness to Giga Drain. Even better, Tucker misplayed a click counter on turn 1, letting me take down Swampert in 2 turns, and be in green health when a second Pokemon, Salamence, came out. I misplayed badly here though and clicked Toxic, forgetting that it had Lumberry, which led to Lileep going down without doing anything to Salamence. Fortunately, I had Abra in the back which was carrying Ice Punch, and happened to outspeed and one-shot Salamence. So just like that, I had my Silver Symbol in only 10 attempts. But don't let that fool you. This is where the real challenge begins. You see, Silver Symbol is absolute child's play compared to Gold. I spent 20 days attempting Gold with this same team and never got beyond a 25 win streak, not even close to the 40 needed for Gold. And this is where we need to talk a lot about Battle Dome. In the Battle Frontier, opponents are intended to have perfect IV Pokemon, but in Battle Dome, due to a bug in the code, all Pokemon actually have 3 IVs instead, except for Tucker's team. Despite this, they still greatly outclass our little mons, but it does help at least bridge the gap. Another interesting thing about Dome is how it seeds tournaments. In short, every trainer is ranked 1 to 16 based on their team stats, and higher total stat teams get seeded higher. This is relevant to determine who you face, and in the event of a tie, the game awards the win to the trainer with the higher seed. Since we are running extraordinarily low base stat Pokemon, we can pretty much guarantee that we're always going to be the lowest seed, meaning that ties will result in a loss. I will note that there is a bug related to these seedings where stats can overflow and force strong trainers to have low seeds, so it is theoretically possible we could win a tie. However, I never once had this happen in any attempt. Before we get back to team building, we should also talk about these trainer cards. Magpie Labs has a great breakdown on this topic, but I'll try to give a quick enough summary here. In short, we can predict what possible moves the opponents do and do not have based on these card descriptions, as well as how their EVs are spread across their stats. Every Pokemon in Frontier gets pulled from a pre-made list of builds, and there's between 1 and 10 possible sets for every Pokemon, with higher numbered sets generally being stronger. The trainer card and the round you are in can help to determine which of these sets each trainer has access to. Before going into each battle, the game is supposed to check your team and choose 2 Pokemon based on how they match up versus yours, but this is bugged. Instead of checking your entire team, they accidentally run the check after you've already selected your 2, which changes how their Pokemon selection is done. It's a bit more complicated than that, but either way, in theory, we could figure out which version of each Pokemon they most likely have, and which they're likely to take into battle. That said, doing this by hand is practically impossible, but luckily someone took pity on me and linked me Mo's Dome Assistant tool. In short, if we enter the details of our team and our opponents into it, it can do these calculations and tell us which Pokemon the opponent is likely to have, as well as which one is likely to pick given what we pick. I know some people may dislike the idea of using this, however, I do not think Little Cup Battle Dome is possible without this tool. Honestly, even if you use it, there are still matchups that can't be fully determined, and if you lead wrong or make a single bad prediction at any point in the 40 battles needed to clear this, it is a loss. In addition to Dome Assistant, I also used Eisencalc to check speed and damage calculations for almost every turn of every battle. This may seem overkill, but the handicap is truly bad enough that every single turn on all 40 battles must be optimized. With that said, step 1 is to build a team, which is particularly difficult because we're essentially fighting the entire Pokédex and trying to cover every potential hazard with only 3 Little Cup Pokemon. Testing a team is also annoying, because a lot of teams don't get invalidated until we reach high win streaks, but those can take a long time and a lot of attempts to reach and determine what gets invalidated. The later round Pokemon like Aerodactyl, Jolteon, Dugtrio, or Gengar can one-shot just about anything we bring, and they're difficult, if not impossible, to outspeed. I had been using Abra and Diglett to fill the sweeper role, but as I reached higher rounds, I hit a territory where they couldn't reliably take out a Pokemon on their own, and using 2 to take 1 down won't win us the match. The leap also started to be a bit more unreliable in later rounds, since it was forced more often into unfavorable matchups. There were other options for sweepers like Houndour and Staryu, and potential replacements for Lileep. But before getting into individual Pokemon, we need to make a plan for each slot of this team. The biggest issue I was facing was getting one-shot by fast Pokemon, so I needed something fast of my own that could outspeed and KO anything that was thrown at it. And it turns out there's a perfect Pokemon for this role. Ghastly. It's fast, it's got high special attack, it's immune to priority moves like Mach Punch or Quick Attack, it's got a ground fighting and normal immunity, and best of all, it gets Destiny Bond. While losing Ghastly to take another Pokemon out isn't ideal, it gave me an option for things I didn't have a plan versus, and ensured that I could pick up a KO regardless of what they tossed out in slot 1. The obvious way to build it was to maximize speed and special attack, but unfortunately, even at max speed, there's about 50 opposing sets that can still outspeed it. So I settled on a gimmick strat, which was using Endure to trigger Salac Berry. At 192 speed EVs, a 30 IV, and a neutral speed nature, if I triggered Salac Berry, Ghastly would outspeed any opposing set the Dome could throw at me. This meant for slot 1, we had a surefire strat to take out any major threat, as long as they didn't get status while using Endure. For the next slot, I was pretty confident that Lileep would be a good backing Pokemon for Ghastly, and this set this slot into the role of tank. Given its bulk, it could 1v1 a large range of threats, so the idea was that Ghastly could take out the first Pokemon, and then I could use Leap to stall the second. There were some exceptions to what I could handle though, namely threats like Choice Banded Absol, Skarmory, Heracross, and generally anything that was Grass or Ice type. While Ghastly certainly covered a chunk of those, I couldn't prevent fighting a mono Ice or Grass team, so my third slot had to be something to cover Leap's weaknesses. A sweeper was the obvious third role, but it was a tough slot to fill, with Abra, Houndour, and Staryu all being decent and having different strengths and weaknesses. In hindsight, I think Houndour filled this role best, since it could swap into Psychic to save Ghastly, and was good against most threats that Leap struggled with. These three mostly left me struggling against Water and Ice types, which was unfortunately more common in the later rounds, with Lapras in particular showing up a lot. Due to this typing, I'd switch my third member to Staryu who would naturally resist, and then due to Staryu's weaknesses to other things I'd go back to Abra, and then from it back to Houndour and eventually keep cycling through, with none of them really fitting properly into slot 3. It didn't seem like any Pokemon could fill this role well, and I generally got stuck trying to figure out a good third member. After enough losses, I came to the conclusion that this core in general wasn't cutting it, with Oko moves in particular being painful, and some team matchups just having no possible path to victory. There were just too many things that could go wrong, like Quick Claws activating, hitting a bad lead, getting crit, flinched, or statused, and my horrible luck wasn't helping, so I decided to reevaluate. These are the Pokemon I considered and built sets for while trying to come up with something, and I rotated my cores a lot, trying out things from triple sweepers to triple stall, but after testing I can say that these were the only ones that felt like they had any potential. From these, I realized that Shroomish was a pretty solid option. It's banned in some Little Cup formats due to its Wombo combo, also known as Spore, Substitute, and Leech Seed. On paper, this combo sounds like it could be busted and win any match, but you gotta remember, we're literally fighting legendary Pokemon with babies. Still, I managed to come up with a set and stat spread that functioned pretty well. With this, only 116 opposing sets could one-shot it, and almost all of them were late-round threats, but outside of those it should be able to win by Leech Seed stalling and staying behind Substitute. It also solved one of the major problems I had, which was this Absol 2 set. It's choice banded and quite nasty for Little Cup Pokemon due to its damage potential, one-shotting most of the Little Cup roster, but Shroomish can guaranteed live as Double Edge with 2 HP. At this point, you might say that Dome should be won. We bring Ghastly, Destiny Bond the first Pokemon, then Sleep and Leech Seed stall the last. But as good as that sounds, the reality is that this is not enough to bust through even 5 rounds, as there were still some Pokemon that punched major holes in this strat, specifically ones that run one-hit KO moves, or big damage moves like Explosion. So this brought me back to deciding on slot 3. If we list out the Pokemon that are difficult for Ghastly or Shroomish, Houndour or Staryu make the most sense. They can deal with the fire types better than Abra, and give a bit of resistance if I need to swap into one. However, there were a few key threats that neither handled nicely, specifically Aerodactyl, Lapras, and Walrein, though that's not an exhaustive list. If I were to consider a different third member, they'd need to be able to deal with other key threats like these guys, and generally any Explosion or Oko move user. For that last slot, I really needed something that posed such a threat that it would force the enemy to counter me, something so strong that it didn't need to be super effective to get KOs. That Pokemon turned out to be Doduo. Doduo had just enough speed to outspeed the things that mattered, while also getting access to Flail and being normal for the same type attack bonus. With Stab and Lychee Berry, it effectively gets 100% extra damage on Flail, which is already a very strong move. If you're not familiar with Flail, it deals more damage the lower the user's HP is, which pairs perfectly with a stat boosting berry like Lychee. This is the build that I settled on, and after setting up, it could one-shot 87% of the possible sets in Battle Dome. It did have drawbacks though, like being prone to priority moves and not being able to outspeed key threats like Gengar or Aerodactyl. For priority moves, I could simply change into Ghastly, and then return again later without the Lychee boost, while the faster Pokemon I just needed to play differently for. Opting for Jolly and 252 speed EVs might seem wasteful, but it actually made Doduo outspeed Charizard by a single point, which was a matchup I needed to beat. Unfortunately, this left me with a few problematic Pokemon, namely Fortress, Scizor, Electrode, Gengar, and Sceptile. These were threats that Ghastly had to deal with, and what forced its moveset into Hidden Power Fire and Thunderbolt. Hidden Power Fire was for Scizor and Fortress since they weren't great matchups for the other two, while Thunderbolt helped counter Aerodactyl 3 and 4, Scyther 2, and Fearow. The final builds for these I meticulously tuned, often running 6 or more attempts after moving just a couple of IVs until I got what I felt was most optimal. When giving this attempts, tournaments 1 and 2 were generally uneventful, and most generated Pokemon here were either also Little Cup or had really bad movesets. The third round was a bit of an odd one, with teams that had both good and bad sets, but the biggest consistent threat in this one was Absol. Initially, I had planned to fight it with Shroomish, but I slowly realized that I could bait it into Double Edge, then swap to Ghastly since its choice band would force it to keep using it and lead to a free KO. There are some scarier threats that can spawn in round 3, like Snorlax, and in cases where something like it set Double Team up, I just had to stall them out with Shroomish. Starting at round 4, it was critical to know the opponent's leads, and we start getting big threats like Dugong, Armaldo, Sceptile, Flygon, and Kingdra. At this point, I started trying to set up scenarios where I could sleep an enemy, then swap to Ghastly to KO it, which let me Destiny Bond the final Pokemon safely. Round 5 is where the Wild West starts, with Aerodactyl, Swampert, and most of the Pokedex getting added to the possible enemy list. Every round here and onwards, I would usually spend 5 to 15 minutes before each battle to plan out how every turn would go, and ensure I had a path to victory before picking my leads. You might think that Doduo would have fallen off by now, but even at this round, depending on the team generation, it was still possible that it would pick up a full team sweep with the right matchup. Round 6 is where the difficult alternate sets come in, and a few theme teams can make this round particularly difficult, like this Gustavo generation I got with Aerodactyl, Aggron, and Golem. What made this matchup tough was Golem since it carried Explosion and had Quick Claw. As you can see in this attempt, I went for Destiny Bond, but the Quick Claw activated, so even if you get into a good scenario, it's very easy to lose due to an item or status effect. Some of the Bug Maniacs get really threatening in this round as well due to Armaldo. Because of its rock typing and bulk, neither Ghastly or Doduo can take it out before they get KO'd. If we go Ghastly to Destiny Bond Armaldo, then it seems like Doduo should be able to win, but Doduo can't KO certain threats like Fortress or Scizor due to Scizor having Quick Attack. This would sometimes force me into Shroomish versus Bug types like Scizor, but this is a high risk play since Scizor 2 has a 6% chance to KO Shroomish on turn 1, but I honestly didn't have a better play in these cases, and despite the team building effort, I still had to take the risk sometimes. Round 7 is where the really hard hitting sets start, and sets with confusion or other statuses also became common. Even worse is that in this one and up, it's really hard to pin down which version of each Pokemon the opponent has, and there's not enough data in the first battle or two for Dome Assistant to figure it out either. Since there could be a huge number of possible teams, I generally just needed to find a strategy that could cover as many of them as possible. This meant either setting up with Doduo to sweep with Flail, or finding a strategy to get Shroomish behind Substitute. Skarmory was also frequent this round, which was problematic since it tended to carry Toxic and was hard to take down for my team. That said, a lot of the Skarmory sets tend to have counter, and the AI in this game really love to click it, especially versus the team that I ran, so I often got lucky on these turn 1s where I could have lost. Mispredicting a lead at this round also started being a run-ender, but in matchups like this one, it didn't seem like there was a correct answer. In scenarios like this, I'd break the battle down into 3 cases, depending on who the opposing lead was. In this case, as long as Nidoqueen wasn't first, I could win, so then the question became how to deal with the leads that would stop me. In this scenario, the answer was to simply swap to Ghastly to make use of its poison resistance as Nidoqueen would click its poison move, then Destiny Bond and let Shroomish clean up. Round 8 isn't any better of a story, and this is where Parasong and Oko moves like Sheer Cold started becoming more common. Often I'd lead with Ghastly to try and either stall out the one-hit KO moves or KO its user directly. In the event that they would lead something else that Shroomish could set up on, like this Miltank, I'd just let Ghastly go down, or hard swap into Shroomish so I could be behind Substitute before the Yokomon came out. I wanted to mention this round 8 starter only team because it requires some pretty interesting forethought. At first, it looks like a clean Doduo sweep, but almost every possible combination for this team carried either Bright Powder or Focus Band, and if either triggered, I'd lose. Charizard was the biggest issue, and since I was planning on Ghastly and Shroomish, I eliminated the possibility of it being set 2, meaning it was Charizard 1 or 4. Both were bad news, but the main issue was that if I led Shroomish I couldn't swap back to Ghastly or it would get KO'd, then I'd lose, so this forced me to lead Ghastly. With a Charizard or Venusaur lead, I could Destiny Bond and win with Shroomish in the back, since Blastoise would be guaranteed to be Pokemon number 2. Shroomish actually only matches up against Blastoise here, so my goal was to force the match into that, and if they led Blastoise, I could simply swap back to Shroomish. If I didn't know Blastoise was guaranteed from Dome Assistant, I likely would have tried to go Ghastly and Doduo instead, in case they brought both Venusaur and Charizard, and this could have led to a loss. This type of decision making only got more difficult the closer to gold I got. In round 9, we start seeing legendaries, and Moltres in particular is a massive threat with multiple sets that could stop a streak. Usually if Moltres was in play, I hoped for it to be the lead, or tried to sack off Ghastly in order to get behind Substitute with Shroomish before it came out. That said, it was common enough that I even saw it in back-to-back battles. This Birdkeeper was a much worse threat than the previous Reggie and Moltres team, partially because there were 8 potential teams it could generate. This is one of the cases where this team specifically works due to the 3 IV glitch, which makes Doduo outspeed Dodrio by a single point. While I could have led Doduo and swept this team, there was a chance of missing against Bright Powder, and if I led with Doduo, I couldn't bring Shroomish in the back safely. Since I was forced to bring Ghastly, if Ghastly needed to Destiny Bond, it didn't really have much benefit of being second. So instead, by leading Ghastly, I could potentially get a full team sweep with it if they led Dodrio through a one-hit Thunderbolt, or I could get the KO on Salamence to prevent Bright Powder from potentially stopping our Flail sweep. It was still possible for Moltres to lead, but even if Ghastly accomplished nothing, then Doduo still had the chance to win. So in matches where I had a chance to sweep with 2 different Pokemon, I viewed it as rolling the dice twice, to hopefully get the sweep with either of the 2 I took. Speaking of Doduo, despite how high we are, it's still really good here, and was absolutely vital versus teams with multiple ice Pokemon, like this Lapras and Glalie battle. Doduo single-handedly swept here, and without it I almost certainly would have lost with Ghastly and Shroomish. I can't speak too much about round 10 since I only made it here one single time, and after reaching it, I was not going to lose. That said, the game really wanted me to, as the first team I got was Gengar, Jinx, and Latios, which is a particularly nasty matchup for my team, and had 4 potential combinations. Gengar was guaranteed to be picked, which ruled Doduo off due to Gengar's immunity to Flail and Speed. That said, if I needed to take out Gengar with Ghastly, then Shroomish could potentially face off against Jinx, which was a matchup I was used to losing. Fortunately, this was Jinx 3, which was still threatening, but at least it wasn't a guaranteed one-shot. Not that Latios was a much better matchup for Shroomish, since it carried Ice Beam and had Lumberry to ignore Spore. That said, Gengar looked like a bigger threat than it was, since Shroomish could survive its Ice Punch, while Latios and Jinx were the actual threats of this team. With the knowledge that Gengar was guaranteed, I had to hope to either KO the second Pokemon with Destiny Bond, or get set up on Gengar with Shroomish. Due to this, I opted to lead Ghastly to Destiny Bond if they led with Latios or Jinx, or to just sack it off if they led Gengar so I could force a situation where I could get Substitute up. In this case, they led Latios, so I got my KO and then just had to hope that Ice Punch didn't freeze and I didn't miss Spore to Bright Powder, which I got very lucky with. The obvious play should be to Substitute next turn, but if Gengar woke up on the second turn I'd get KO'd. So I chose to Protect here to get more HP back from Leech Seed and Leftovers, which put me in the range to take one more Ice Punch. Afterwards, I got Sleep back up and then got behind Substitute, which let me pull out the win. I wanted to highlight this battle because while there were a ton of stressful battles, seeing this at the start of round 10 and having so many possible routes to a loss made it arguably the most stressful match I had. The other round 10 matches were pretty unnotable because Shroomish invalidated a lot of bad matchups like this Grand Bull since it outsped it, though historically I struggled with Grand Bull until I realized that Shroomish outsped it. Finally, it was time for Tucker Goal, and at first glance it seems like a rough matchup due to Latias having Chesto Berry and Calm Mind, but the secret is that with our team, Tucker could never choose Latias to begin with. Even better, neither of the other two could KO Shroomish, so despite looking bad on paper, it was literally just an anticlimactic match where I clicked Spore and Leech Seed until both went down. And with that, I had finally gotten Gold Symbol after around 50 days of attempts, not including the planning and prep time. I only highlighted some specific battles, because if I went through every interesting matchup, this probably would have been a 12-hour video, but I hope this gave you a bit of insight to the thought process that went on during virtually every battle of every attempt. The Battle Dome is the first gold symbol we've gotten in Frontier, and in my opinion, this is probably going to be the easiest for the challenge due to the 3 IV glitch. Outspeeding certain threats like Charizard and Aerodactyl by 1 point, or being able to live certain threats like Salamence and Glalie is not a luxury I'll get in other places. So, get subscribed if you'd like to see the other 6 facilities, as I've already started attempts on them. If you enjoyed, consider liking or commenting, as these help out the channel massively. Or, if you'd like to help me caffeinate up for these, consider checking out my Ko-fi. With that said, I am pretty proud to topple Dome, and I'm actually quite excited to dive into the pyramid next. I'm Glitch the Box Links, and I'll see you in the next Out of the Box Challenge.